Oh, you too grown for that now? Oh my God. She gone? Johnson's coming. Finally, my awesome Dawson gets to come home. This is the best Christmas gift ever. I don't see milk coming. Oh, you're there. Tell me something. I'm just gonna take her back to the hospital. I don't want to do it, but I.
Hi, everybody. Good evening. Hello, hello. Just gonna give folks a little bit more time to join the Instagram live before I invite Leslie. Hi, Sinaria. Hi. Hi, everybody. Yes, Tabrali, she does. And yesterday she came over and I gave her a bunch of books. So she left really happy. Hi, everyone. I'm watching a TLC TV show with this family that has 14 kids. I'm just obsessed with this show and how does this woman and her husband handle 14 kids? And they've had multiples, quintuplets, twins, triplets. It's insane. It's crazy. I have one kid and my kid is like really well behaved, but any parent that has more than one child, I'm just like, God bless you. God bless you all. But 14 kids. 14. I can't get over that. 14 kids. Hi, Leslie. Hi. Hi, Leslie. There's a flyer on my Instagram right there that says Q&A with a literary agent. That is what we're doing today. Today we're speaking to literary agent Leslie Zampetti to answer all your questions about the role of a literary agent and how they can help you get published. So for all the authors out there who are writing, this Q&A is definitely for you. Get your questions straight. Use the question mark icon at the bottom of your phone screen. Please use the question mark icon. Please use the question mark icon. If you make any questions in the comments, I'm not going to even bother reading them. I'm not. So please follow instructions. Use the question mark icon because it helps us keeps us organized and we can see all the questions in one place. Okay, I'm going to welcome Leslie. Look at you.
Hey, woohoo! We made it.
Hi.
This is exciting. I'm like, party.
You made it. You figured that I told you it's not that hard.
Oh God.
Leslie,
you know what?
I'm forever putting you to do things that is just not your
What? I love it because otherwise, how would I be doing it? So now I
your
know.
norm.
Now I know, and I'm like, woohoo!
But I'm glad that you're always open to my ideas, that you know enthusiastically accept, and we figure it out. So thank you so
Oh,
much for accepting my invitation.
Angie, I love you, and I love this. I think it's fun, and if we can't, this beats Zoom all to heck. I can tell you that right now.
Well, yeah, that it does. Yes. So Leslie, um, tonight we're gonna have a conversation about your role
Yeah.
as a literary agent and how you assist writers to get published.
Yep.
For those of you who are joining us tonight, please write down your questions. Use the question mark icon at the bottom of your phone screen so that we could all see your questions. Leslie, you and I met last year when I invited you to join our first Dominican Writers
Yes.
Conference to perform manuscript reviews, correct?
Yes, and it
And
was wonderful.
you came in and you sat down with writers for about 15 minutes and you gave them your review, your opinion, your suggestions on their manuscript, correct?
Yeah.
And recently this summer, because we had to postpone the conference, you did a workshop with us on a one page, right, where you were
Yep.
reviewing the first page of a writer's manuscript, and then you also reviewed the manuscripts of those writers who had already purchased manuscript reviews for this year's conference. And, because we wanted them to still be able to take advantage of that. So I thank you so much, because our writers, sometimes they're afraid to submit anything. And some of them I had to push a little bit and nudge
Keep
and tell them, come on, just
keep
do it.
pushing, just like you're pushing me. Keep pushing
And they
them.
all had nothing but nice things to say about you, because you're a sweetheart. And
Oh, you're
it's been
making
wonderful.
me blush.
It's been wonderful to collaborate with you. So thank you so much.
Well, I have loved working with you, working with the Dominican writers. The first conference was just a huge success. It was great to see so many people gathered, people writing all different kinds of works, just interested in how they can get out there. What are they doing with their writing? So the fact that even with this disaster of a year that 2020 has been, the fact that we can go ahead and try to recreate a little bit of that energy, try to give people some of that feedback or encourage them on their journey, it's great.
Thank you. Thank you. So, Leslie, you work for Dunham, is it Literary?
Yes, Dunham Literary. Jenny Dunham is the owner and president and the senior agent, and then I'm there. And we also have an assistant, Genevieve Luce, who is probably going to be coming up as an agent in her turn. So it's a small agency. We represent both children's lit and adults, although right now my clientele is exclusively kids, or not kids themselves, but children's writers. I am looking to expand that a little bit because, again, the more writers you have as clients, you don't want to have too many because everybody needs a certain amount of attention. Right. But if you only have, say, 5 writers and they're all writing novels, well, we all know that takes a long time. That means I'm sitting there twiddling my thumbs. So.
Right. So when you refer to children's book writers, what genre? Is it middle grade? Is it YA? Is it elementary?
I actually represent picture books through YA. So I represent picture book writers, those who write easy readers or chapter books, and those are a little different. We tend to think of them as the same. Easy readers are really, they're written with very specific rules in mind. A lot of times those projects are developed in-house by publishers, and they treat them as work for hire projects where they might contract out with a writer because they have a concept, because they're really used in the classroom and they give kids confidence. They're really just starting to sound out words. So the types of words you use, the types of language you use. One thing that just occurred to me, I don't know if there are any bilingual easy readers. That might be a great thing to have. I'll have to talk to some of the editors.
On this live right now.
Yeah, so I will have to talk to some editors and say, hello, we could really use this. Chapter books are a little bit more advanced. They're still pretty simplistic. they're a little more formulaic than middle grade. And the reason for that is that those kids, again, they're not just learning to read, but they've just learned to read. So what they're building is fluency. They don't worry so much about the plot or characters as they're really gaining that confidence to say, yes, I'm a strong reader. And then you have middle grade, which is what we think of kids from about 7 to 12 or so, 8 to 12. And then YA, which is 13 and up. And there is that sort of amorphous spot in middle school where kids might be reading middle grade, might be reading YA, might be reading a mix. But you know what companies are like, publishers, bookstores alike. Where does it go on the shelf? Where does it fit?
Right. So, Leslie, could you tell us how you became a literary agent? Did you always want to be, how did you come into that field?
It was serendipity. Actually, I was a librarian for over 20 years. I started out actually working for big corporations and consulting firms, and I even worked for NASA for a little while as a cataloger. And then I was writing myself once my daughter was born, and I actually fell into becoming a children's librarian at that time because I had applied to local public library. I went to renew some books, and they had a message up saying, hey, we're going to get a reference librarian. And I was like, oh, I could do that, and I don't need to have childcare because it'll be all nights and weekends. This is great, because we all know what that's like, right? And so I took it on, and when I went for the interview, they're like, oh, by the way, we have a children's librarian who's on maternity leave, so you have to take over that desk a couple nights a week. Are you okay with that? And I was like, sure, why not? And I fell in love with it. And then after a few years of working as a children's librarian, even working as a school librarian, I was still writing. I attended a conference for the New Jersey Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. And one of the agents there was talking, and we were all just kind of hanging out, having a drink. And when he left, I said, wow, that sounds like a really interesting job. And one of the other writers who was there, who I didn't know all that well, we met recently, was published it and agented. And he said, well, I'd be your client if you were an agent. And I was like, huh, that's really sweet. But then I went home, and those wheels started turning. Yeah, crazy wheels, but wheels. And I thought, well, what skills do I have? Like, what is this about? And what agenting about is both having the skills to identify what readers will want for both the ultimate reader and the interim readers, the editors, and also having the business skills. Can you negotiate a contract? How do you advocate for somebody? How do you promote them? I'm not necessarily promoting my author clients like marketers, but I am promoting them to editors. And I realized, I have a lot of those skills from being a librarian and from doing the things I'm doing. And I know a lot about reading because I've been reading since I was 3 years old. And before I became an agent, I used to average over 300 books a year. I am not doing that anymore because a lot of my reading time is my clients and my would-be clients and all of that. And it's really great. But that's sort of how I fell into it. And then I started working for it, and I got very lucky. I was privileged enough to be accepted as an intern for the Bent agency as a reader. And then around the time that I was like, okay, I'm going to
as a reader.
So some agencies that are bigger and some agents that are really experienced use readers because they get so many thousands of queries. They can't possibly read everything. And so what happens is they have someone who's going through their queries, and then they have somebody who they say, okay, I want you to read these manuscripts and report on it to me. What is this like? Is this going to fit with my tastes? What's the strengths of this manuscript? Are there weaknesses? What do you think? And so I did that for a while. And not every agent uses readers. I don't, and Jenny doesn't. Jenny will occasionally get a second opinion from me or from Jen, her assistant.
What are the requirements to become a reader for an agency?
Oh, wow. Well, you need to read a lot. That's really the biggest requirement. And more importantly, you need to read what that agent is looking for. So for instance, it was a fit for Jenny Bent because I read so widely. I read adult literature, I read kid literature, I read YA, all things she represents. You wouldn't want to be a reader for someone. So like, for instance, I would probably be a really bad reader for another agent who does horror. I have read horror. I do read occasional horror, but it's not really my wheelhouse. So there are things I might be missing, if I'm reading things. I might not understand why something is really groundbreaking or really great. But after that, Jenny had an opportunity available as her assistant. And so I went in as a part-time assistant for her and worked with her. And then about a year and a half in, the goal was that I would be representing my own clients, and I've been representing my own clients for 2 years now.
Nice. Congratulations.
Thanks.
That sounds
It's
like an
fun. It's like, woohoo.
awesome position.
Yes. And the best part is now that's all I do. So this is my job. This is my career. It's what I love.
Wonderful. So could you walk us through what your role is as a literary agent?
So my job is to take care of the business so that my client, who's the author, can write their books. It's my job to make sure that they have the time, the space, the money to do all that. And by that, what I mean is that it's my job to sell their books and to negotiate contracts that are advantageous to them. I have a good example in this. One of my clients is Anne-Claire Lazat, who happens to be deaf, and she had sold her first book to Scholastic before we met. And it wasn't a bad contract, but it wasn't the best contract. And so when we went to go work for, when they went to buy her second book, and I announced that deal this summer, we got a 2-book deal for her, there were things that I knew to ask for that she wouldn't necessarily know. And it's not always about the money. I mean, more money can be good. Too much money can be bad, because if someone comes along and says, I'm going to give you this great 6-figure deal, Angie, for this book of poetry. And you're like, wow, amazing. This is more money than I've seen. This is fabulous. But there's a catch, which a lot of writers don't think about, which is that if that book doesn't sell enough copies to earn back all that money, they're probably not going to buy another book from you. And you're going to be sitting there and you got that jackpot, but we know what happens with jackpots, right? You play the lottery, you get that extra little 20 bucks on a scratch off card, and the next thing you know, you went to the bodega and you're like, oh man, you know, several candy bars later and it's gone. You know, it doesn't last the same way, no matter what you do with it. Right. And for my clients, and this is not always true, some people, they just want that one big deal. They have that one big book. That's what they want. I want my clients to have a career. I want them to keep writing, to enjoy writing, to write what they have to say, because especially for Dominican writers, that has not always been the case. You know, people have not always been looking for those stories. And so there's kind of a lack of those stories out there. And so we want people to be able to keep writing and keep telling that, and not like, oh, you got your story and you're done. That's all you get. You know, that's not right. So
how does a author find you?
So I get most of my clients through my slush pile, which means somebody submits a query letter and the first 5 pages, or the entire text if it's a picture book, to query@Dunham, DUNHAMLIT, DunhamLit.com. And it pops up in my inbox, and I usually mark it and say, oh, that goes to my queries and not Jenny's queries, because it's attention Leslie Zampetti, or they say Dear Leslie or Dear Ms. Zampetti in some form or the other. And I say, okay. And then I go through those, not usually every day, but usually every few days. I get so many that I can't process them all immediately. So
that was usually my next question.
Yeah.
I can only imagine your inbox.
Yeah. I figured out that I had gotten, and this is the pandemic year, with all the craziness going on, I had gotten 1,000 queries from January through May, over 1,000. And I stopped counting. I was like, I don't know what I've gotten from May through October.
And you've gone through them?
I am current as of October 6th. Those are the ones sitting on my list.
Oh my God.
But here's the other catch. So once I go through that, ones that I know are things that I'm not going to represent. Because like sometimes people query me and say, I have this Christian romance that's really more about the religion than the romance. You know, they don't put it that way, but that's what it comes through in their query. And I'm like, not such a fit for me, maybe. Yeah. I send them a nice no. You know, this is not right for me. I'm sorry, and I wish you all success. Because I do. I want them to succeed. Anything that I might be really interested in goes into a separate pile, another inbox for me. And that usually is running, when it's bad, it can be 50 to 70. When it's good, it's usually more around 20 or 30. And those are things, I have some in there that are actually from like July, which is really bad. Because the problem with those is those are things those
from
are things
and that's
from
bad.
Well, for me, that's bad.
I was expecting you to say, yeah, I have some from 2018 that I haven't gotten back to since July.
Oh, that would be so rude. I mean, so this is the one thing about if you go with a newer agent, I have more time. Because I have fewer clients and I'm still getting clients, I'm really motivated to look at those queries. Now, you have someone like Jenny or a more senior agent or somebody who's much more experienced. They have more clients and they have to spend a proportionate more time on those clients. They may be less interested in getting new clients, not because they don't want new writers to succeed, but because they simply know if I have two more people, that's going to be one too many or two too many. You know, you have to wait till you find out, okay, this person's working on a really long project that they're doing a lot of research, so maybe I'll have more time for somebody else. But yeah, I felt bad because I like to keep things within a couple of months. But the reason they're sitting in there is I'm probably going to request that manuscript. And that's the other break, is when I actually reach out and say, I'd love to read it, send it to me. And
Could you explain to our viewers what a query is and how long is it supposed to be?
Sure. Short and simple. Keep it under a page. If you can get, you know, half, 3/4 of a page, that's better, because this is just a business letter. You're just introducing yourself to me, and more importantly, you're introducing your book to me, because that's really the important part. That's what I want to read about. What is your story about? What are the themes? What's the emotional arc? Can I see the whole arc of the story in the query? That doesn't mean you're going to tell me everything that happens in the story. That's a synopsis. But what you are is going to tell me just enough that makes me go, I want to read this. And not only do I want to read this, but yeah, I have a sense that this has got more to it. Because the one mistake a lot of people make, and Beth Phelan, who runs DV Pit, mentioned this today on Twitter, that you don't want it to be so vague that we don't have a sense of what's really happening. It needs to be pretty specific, so that we're like, okay, Angie's sending me a story, and her protagonist in it has, you know, let's use Elizabeth, you know, Acevedo's book, where Clap When You Land. You know, one girl finds out that her father has died in the DR, and the other girl is living in the DR, and her father has died. And the query gives me this idea that something's going on there, and they're both going to have this...
So it's basically piquing your interest enough to request that manuscript. And when you request that manuscript, do you request a completed manuscript?
Oh yes, you should always have your manuscript ready to go if you're querying, because some agents only request pages. I request the whole thing, because I don't see the point in telling you, send me 25 pages and I might want more, because that's just more administrative work on our end. If I tell you, send me the whole thing, I will know within the first 10% if this is a book I want to continue reading. I give my queryers, you know, the manuscripts I request, the same attention I do the books I pull when I browse at the library. This looks really great. Let's read it. If you haven't gotten me in that 10%, so for, you know, a 250-page book for a novel, that's pretty average. That's 25 pages. Yeah, chances are not good that I'm going to keep reading. And that's why your first sample pages, those 5 pages, that's why I ask for that with the query. Because once you have that business letter down, then what I want to read is those first 5 pages. Because I want to see if you have a voice. I want to see if, when I say, okay, I'm putting this in my 2 reads, if I'm still thinking about that story and I'm sending editor emails, and I'm like, man, I really want to read that book. If that book were at the library, I would have it on hold. I would be going down. If it's really good, I might even have bought it already, because I'm like, I can't wait for my hold to come in. That's what sort of whets that appetite. Sometimes I get queries that are great, but the pages don't match up. It just doesn't sound right, or it doesn't sound appropriate for the age level. You know, sometimes I get people who say this is a middle grade book, but it doesn't really sound like a middle grade book. You know, it doesn't sound like a middle grade child. You know, it's an adult writing about that child.
Do you say that to the writer? Do you reply to them and give him that information?
So if I have requested a manuscript, yes, you will get some feedback. Sadly, sometimes the feedback is, I just wasn't enthusiastic enough, because there are some books I read that I'm like, this is a good book, but I don't know what to do with it. I can't think where I would send it. I can't think, who do I know that will want this? What do I want to do with this book? Because I am kind of hands-on. So some agents are editorial and will work with you on your manuscript to get it better. Some do not. It just depends. That's something you need to think about when you're looking at agents, what you want.
Are you are you one of those agents, editorial?
Yeah, I am. I like to make sure everything is going out is the best it can be.
By that you mean that you will work with the writer to polish that manuscript before you shop it to a publisher.
So here's an example. I got a YA novel from a client. this is what made her a client. It was a retelling of an Agatha Christie mystery, And Then There Were None, where they're all trapped on this island and they're getting killed off one by one. And hers was a little more set in space, which sounds crazy, but it was actually kind of fun. They're supposed to be on a reality TV show, and then they realize there's no reality TV show. Somebody's just killing them off, and they don't know why. They don't know why they're there. When I got it, I read it, and I was like, wow, I love this. But then when I finished it, I thought, well, there's some things with the pacing here. And this character, to me, this seems too stereotypical. And this character, we need to know more about them. And that relationship could be emphasized. And those are the kinds of things that like I would work with somebody. And then I also will do just a straight out, watch your commas. That needs to be capitalized. That word's not quite right there. That word jolted me out of the story. So that when I send it to an editor, it's got its best chance of being bought. You know, the editor's going to read it and say, yeah, I really want to read this. Because the process that writers don't always realize is what they go through with me, where they're sending me a query and that sample pages, I'm going through with the editor. I don't usually send sample pages. They either want the book or they don't. But I have to send them the pitch, which is essentially my version, make them want to read that book, where they say, yeah, send that out to me.
Right. Okay. So once you requested a manuscript and this is it, this is the manuscript, you love it, you want to work with this writer, what happens next?
Oh, that's the fun part. So that's when I contact them and I say, look, I really liked your book. And there are two ways I go about this. The first way is there's no question about it. I want this book. I want this client. We set up a call. We're ready to go. The second one, I'm also setting up a call, but I might want to talk a little more about the book and about what else they're writing. And I ask that of all my clients, you know, what else are you interested in writing? What else do you want to work with? Because again, for me, I represent clients for their career. So you might come to me with a picture book that I love, but you might say, you know, I really love this picture book and I have these other picture books that you asked for, but I've got this YA novel in my head that I just can't get out. It might not be done. It might be something you're thinking about, but I want to know, is that something that we're on the same page? Because you might come to me with those picture books, and because I also do represent adults, you might say, listen, I know you love my picture books, but I also have this erotic sports romance. I have 5 of them. And I might be like, yeah, romance is good, but an erotic sports romance, probably not for me.
Erotic sports, you said?
You know what? I thought I made that up because I thought it would be like something nobody writes.
Well, you learn something new every day.
I guess what it means is it's just a really spicy, hot romance and it's set with sports players. I'm assuming, because that's not something I rep. And the thing is, you don't want me repping what I don't read, you know, because I don't know enough about it to be a good advocate.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Whatever people can write about, they will.
So in other words, what you're saying is that you want to stick to the manuscript that you loved instead of looking at their whole collection of everything else.
Well, no, what I'm saying is I want to know what else they're interested in, because I want to see that it's all a fit.
Got it. Okay.
Like sometimes it's really sad. You know, I had someone who I just recently really loved their middle grade work. They also write picture books. They also illustrate it. I mean, this person is a triple threat talent-wise. They're very talented. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't as on board with the picture books. You know, they didn't speak to me the same way. And that's hard because when you come down to it, my role as an agent is to be your advocate as an author. I have to love your work even more than you do. Because I gotta make that editor buy it.
You have to break it down to them and say, look, I'm sorry, the picture books aren't it.
Oh God, it breaks my heart. It breaks my heart because it's like, oh, you know, but sometimes that doesn't happen. Sometimes I get somebody and I'm like, yeah, you do these different things and I love the way you do them all. So let's go forward. Let's do this, you know, because again, it's not like I expect them to have everything they're interested in. I just want to make sure that we kind of match up so that they don't suddenly come out to me one day and say, I've got that erotic sports romance and that's what I want to write now. Because then I'll be like, oh my God,
have you ever come across a writer that just wants you to sell that one book, get them as much money as you want, and they're out of the game? That's
all the time.
They're not going to continue writing. Don't try to go for a 2-book deal. I just want this book sold and that's it.
this actually happens all the time. And those are the people I have to say, sorry, I'm just not the person for you. Because
So
there's
you
two kinds
ask
of,
them. You
yeah.
ask them how long they want to be in this.
Oh, yeah. Because the people who write one book tend to be two kinds of people. I mean, I'm sure there's more kinds of people, but these are the two I've come across. And the first is that person who has a particular issue or a particular story that for whatever reason, that is the most important thing in the world to them. So here's an example. I have type 2 diabetes. I might say I wrote a book about a teenager who's diagnosed with type 2. That might be an important book, and it might be something that's, great. But if that's all I want to write about, like that's the book I'm done, then we're not a great fit, me and me, because that's not what I represent. That also might be the kind of book, this happens a lot with picture books. Somebody writes about a child with, say, type 1 diabetes. Well, that might be a great book, and it might be a book that parents and kids with diabetes need, but most trade publishers, like the big publishers, they're not going to publish that because it's not going to make them enough money. Because again, this is a business. The stories are important, but it's a business. It runs on money. You got to have something to get the money. And so a lot of times I'll recommend that they partner with somebody else to publish that, like say the American Diabetes Association, or self-publishing is perfectly valid. That's a choice too. You do a lot more work, but you get all the reward. The other kind of person is someone who just has this concept book that they are totally all about that one concept, and they have dreams that they're going to write this book and it's going to be a movie, it's going to be TV shows, and then they're done. And that's not really for me either, because there are agents that do that and they're really good at that, but that's not what I'm good at.
But it's also, what are the odds, right? Like
that's
the
part
odds
of
are
it.
very slim that your book is going to get picked up for a movie.
That's part of it. And
right?
Part of it is also that sometimes we get disappointed. Like even if it gets picked up for a movie, there are a lot of books that have been optioned, but those options never get turned into a movie or a TV show. So they made some money on it, and that was great, but it didn't really go anywhere. And if you look at it from my perspective as an agent, you have to sell an awful lot of those one book deals to keep going. But if I have clients who continue writing, the more they write, the more I have to sell. Ideally, the more I sell, the better I do.
We saw the Twitter hashtag publishing paid me.
Let me tell you, agents don't make a lot. I mean, this is something people don't always know, but most agents have, agenting is not their day job.
I'm lucky. If a writer's getting $10,000, you're just getting a percentage of that $10,000.
15% usually, unless it's a foreign sale or a media sale. So think about that when you do the math. I'm good at percentages. I'm not so good at other math, but I'm really good at retail math and commissions. But the thing is, too, is that's also partly why, I'm fortunate in that I'm privileged enough to be able to do this as my day job and to invest this kind of time. I have so much admiration for the younger agents or the agents of color, the folks who are just starting out, who they're usually working a full-time job and they're agenting. Right. They're going 24/7. Because you think about that. Agenting isn't just a job where you're like, oh, I was on my shift from, 7 to 9 or 7 to 10. No, you have all the business of agenting, and then you have all that reading you have to do. So, they're probably working a good, I would say, 16, 18, 20 hours a day. Wow. That's a lot, Wow. I'm old. I don't have that kind of energy. So, that's why I'm glad I can do this myself.
So once you have that manuscript, what is the process of getting that into the hands of a publisher?
So loved the manuscript, loved what else this client is thinking about. I was lucky they signed with me, because that's the part writers never think about, is that if there's one of us, there's usually more of us agents. You have a choice. So I got lucky. I won that client. What I do then is we get that manuscript into the best shape it can be. That doesn't mean an editor is going to buy it and say it doesn't need editing. What it means is that editor looks at it and says, I have a vision. This is in the best shape it can be. I can make this an even better story. It'll have more layers. It'll have more nuance, more meaning. It's like anything else. We know as writers, the more we work on something, the better it gets. But a lot of times we can't do that by ourselves. Our critique partners make it better.
Right.
You get me, hopefully I make it better. That's why we need to agree about our vision for the story. Then that editor is going to think of things none of us have even thought about and blow our minds. So while they're working on that, I'm working on creating a list of editors that I think will like this book. And I'm looking for new editors that I don't know, that I can make contacts with that might like this book. And then I'm going to start looking at, okay, I have 5 editors, but they only work for 3 houses. Because there's multiple imprints, because there's like the big publishing house, and then under it, they have all the little imprints. And then under them, they have all the editors. And I have to make sure that if I'm going to be pitching this to an editor at HarperCollins Kids, that I'm not also pitching that same book to Quilltree at HarperCollins, because they're competing directly. They don't like that. So I have to say, okay, so I have so many editors. Where's it going to go? Can I submit to these 2 people at the same time? And I'm also working on my pitch for the book, so that hopefully when the author's ready to go, then I'm ready.
And you write that pitch as the literary agent? Yes,
I do. If you send me an amazing query with an amazing pitch, I am definitely piggybacking off on that. But a lot of times there's things I see in the story that the author doesn't see in the story, and I want to bring that out as well.
Yeah.
I also know what certain editors are looking for, so sometimes I'm tweaking it to make it more appealing to them. I don't want to tweak it too much, because I don't want them to be disappointed and have an expectation that isn't met by the story.
But you put in those keywords that you know is going to resonate with them.
Like, there's a writer out there who's got a Dominican story all about food, and we know I'm all about food, and I'm going to get that, and I'm going to say, oh, and I might think, well, who's looking for, marginalized other stories? Who's looking for, say, this is a YA rom-com, like, the Cuban one for Don't Date Rosa Santos. Okay, so who do I know likes this kind of stories? But I might also say, what editors really like stories about young chefs or competitions or things that are even islands? What are those hooks that I can find to draw an editor in to make them say, I really want, this is the book I didn't know I wanted.
Okay.
And sometimes you get surprised. Sometimes you get editors that you think it's going to be the perfect book for, and they come back and tell you, this doesn't sound like it's for me, or sorry, but I already have one like this coming out. And sometimes you get an editor that you just submitted because they do YA rom-coms, and they're like, oh my God, this is mind-blowing. This sounds so amazing. I have to see this.
Right. So Leslie, you know that the majority of the publishing staff is white.
Yeah.
Right.
Hopefully changing.
How do we get the confidence to submit our stories, our multicultural stories, to a staff that is mostly white and that we know are probably not going to understand it?
This is part of the problem. And this is, again, why you need an agent who understands and working with you. Whether, that may be me, it may not be me. And that's one of the things, you can't just pick agents because you're like, I want an agent. You have to pick an agent that gets your stories. And so when I tell people, whether it's in that first round of queries or it's after I've requested it, if I say this isn't a fit for me, you don't want me as your agent. And it's kind of funny because sometimes people argue about that. And I've noticed most of the people who argue are white men.
Right.
Think about that. But they're clueless because they don't get it.
I remember that when you were reviewing the manuscript for us this summer, some of our writers submitted stories that were either bilingual or had, a sprinkle of words in Spanish, and some of them probably had a few sentences throughout the story that were in Spanish. And my concern was, oh my God, Leslie doesn't read Spanish. Is she going to be able to understand what our writers are trying to convey?
This is sort of the issue. And this is also why I'm working with white editors. Part of my job of looking at them as an editor is, what else have they edited? Are they editing things that show an understanding of these nuances? Can I find something in their bio that says, for instance, for Dominican writers, do they speak Spanish at all? Or better yet, do they speak Spanish from Dominica? You should put that on your bio,
Leslie.
Yeah.
You've done manuscript reviews for us. Give these Latino writers some confidence.
Yeah, but this is the thing, too.
That they can submit their stories to you.
Yes. But this is part of the thing, too. If the writer's done a really good job, I might not know exactly, but I have a really good sense of what's being said because I can look at the context and say it. And I'll illustrate this by telling you a story. So I do speak both Italian and French, which maybe gives me a little bit of edge. And I read and write it more than I speak it because it's been a while. But when I was studying abroad in Italy, one of my good friends, Andrea, his girlfriend Vittoria, was Spanish. Now, Andrea spoke Russian, English, Italian, and I think he had a little tiny bit of Spanish. His girlfriend, Victoria, spoke Spanish, Russian, and something else, maybe German. Nothing I spoke. I was like, I speak Italian and English and French. And one day we're all at a party, and Andrea suddenly looks at me and Victoria and starts laughing hysterically. And we're like, what is so funny? And he said, you, pointing at me, are speaking to her in Italian, and you, pointing at Victoria, are speaking to her in Spanish. But you two are having the conversation, and you don't need, like, once in a while we would turn to him with a word and say, what is this? And he would tell us, what it is. Because sometimes they're a little too close, but they're not the same thing, and that's when you get in trouble.
Got it.
But we were having that conversation and we were communicating because in the context, probably talking about food or fashion or something, we knew what we were talking about and they were close. What you want from an editor is someone who understands those nuances. And what I want from an editor is maybe not someone who speaks Spanish, but someone who understands that Dominican Spanish is not Chilean Spanish, is not Barcelonan Spanish.
Thank you, Leslie.
And definitely not white girl high school Spanish.
Definitely, Leslie. Thank you. I keep repeating that because, I keep seeing some of our favorite stories that are originally written in English get translated to Castilian Spanish.
Which is,
and then like, all the magic from that book is gone. Because, Dominican Spanish is not the same as Chilean and Venezuelan. And, it's just not the same.
Well, people forget. When you speak any kind of language, like when I lived in Venice, I spoke what is Italian, which means Florentine Italian, which is what Italians learn in school. But Venetians, especially if they're native to the area, have a dialect Veneziano. Sometimes you can't understand what they're saying because it's so different. Sometimes you can. And that's true all over the country. It's much the same way in Spanish. Heck, it's the same way in English. You're telling me that, if I go from Florida and I go someplace in England, like there are places in England where I don't know what the heck they're saying. They don't know what the heck I'm saying. We say different things. It was hysterical teaching my daughter when we visited London. At this point, it might be almost 2 years ago. That's kind of scary. That pants in London are not pants. They're underwear. They're panties. So she's going around going, all these things for pants on sale. I'm like, no, those are, you want trousers? That's what they call pants. But again, the important thing is you want an editor who understands that, and an editor who understands that the nuances of what happens in Cuba and their history, what happens in Dominica and Haiti is different from what happens in Chile and Mexico and Spain. And all those things have nuances, and all those things lead to what's important. Like, I just read Don't Date Rosa Santos, and coming from, I grew up in Florida, I understood a lot of what she was feeling from having people who had come from Cuba and knowing people who had done that. But it was interesting to me, at one point, I had to stop and read twice because she's dating a fella who is obviously Latinx, but he's not Cuban American, and that's different. And he doesn't have Cuban ancestry, so it's different. So even if the food is the same, and we're all eating pastelitos, if I'm getting a pastelito from one place and one from another.
Some people put raisins in their pastelitos, and we don't
I'm not so fond of that.
Eat them like that.
I'm a big fan of the guava. Yeah.
So
it's that,
before we go into the question,
understanding that.
For everyone who just arrived, we have a Q&A with Literary Agent Leslie Zampetti. Please, if you have a question, click the question mark icon at the bottom of your screen so that we do not miss your question, okay? Let's see what we have here.
While you're looking, Angie, I just want to say to folks that you can't always find editors who have those nuances, but you can find people who are willing to do the work. And that's what I want. I want to find somebody, if I can't find someone who is, ideally I find someone who has Dominican ancestry in their background or is Dominican so that they can do that. But if not, then they're willing to do the work, and they're willing to work harder and understand it. Ask those questions of the author. Why is this important? What are you saying here? Am I misunderstanding? Because just like you saw in that manuscript critique, I thought I was understanding something that I was close, but not close enough. And so it's on me to ask, to say, well, what does this really mean?
Right. So one of our questions is from about a little girl named Mechi who grew up in Washington Heights and who learns how to dance bachata. So she self-published, and her question is, what would the role of a literary agent be with a self-published author?
So some agents don't even represent self-published authors. They don't see a use for that. I personally would not necessarily take on an author who is only interested in self-publishing, because there isn't a lot of use for me with that. But you might have authors who are self-publishing who are also interested in hybrid publishing. Maybe they have a book that is fit for a larger publishing house, or maybe somebody has approached them and says, I really liked your self-published book. I'd like to republish it and reprint it through our publishing house. And in that case, a lot of times what the role of the agent right there is really just to negotiate the contract or to give them advice. You know, it never hurts to reach out and say, you know, are you available for consultations, for advice?
Right.
Not everybody does that. Very few people will do it necessarily for free, because that is our professional advice. But especially if you have someone, like I know for a lot of romance authors, they are extremely prolific. And they may have some books that are, say, going to Harlequin, and some books that are going to Wild Rose, which is digital. But then they may have books that Wild Rose said, not for us, and Harlequin said, not for us. But that author says, this is important, and I want it to come out, and I'm going to publish it myself. Right. If they already have an agent, that agent can help them sort of organize the project, break down the steps. Maybe they have connections for how that will work. If nothing else, they can put them in touch with folks who do freelance editing and cover designing and things like that.
So
sort of help them on their way.
A literary agent is solely used by writers who want to be published the traditional manner.
Almost
right?
Exclusively,
by one of
yes.
the big five or one of their imprints. It is not for self-published authors, correct?
Not usually, no. That would
not
be unusual.
Usually. There have been cases where an author has self-published, like for example, Gabby Rivera, who self-published her book and was picked up by Dial Books, and there was another second edition of that book. But that does not happen often.
Not as often as people who are trying to get you to give them money to self-publish would like you to believe. Right. I believe that self-publishing is a great option for someone who understands the work involved in doing it and wants to do this themselves, because they want control over that creative process and that artistic product. I would also say, I do want to clarify, it's not just the big five. I work with small presses. So for instance, while I sell books to, like, Scholastic or Penguin Random House, I might also sell books to Carben or Apples and Honey or Packagers or, Beaming Books. So it's more about the traditional aspect of it. And that really depends agent by agent, because everybody has different, there are agents who will work with digital only publishers, for example. Jenny doesn't feel that's beneficial to our clients, so we usually don't do that. It's part of that negotiation that you talk about on that call.
So any author who has self-published before, if they want a literary agent, they need to come to you with a brand new manuscript that has not been published.
That would be ideal for me. For me personally, I would want to see something fresh. There are agents who will say, let's take a look at your self-published manuscript and see what can happen, because you don't know, and it has happened before. And again, it depends on what you're writing. If you are writing, for instance, romance, again, or certain types of memoir, for example, you may have self-published, but you haven't necessarily reached the audience you need to. It would be unusual for me to be able to do that with, say, a picture book or, a chapter book or even a middle grade novel.
Okay, next question. Do you see it?
I do. Is a story a book proposal? No, those are two different things. A book proposal is usually what you use for nonfiction, except memoir, because memoir is nonfiction, but it's treated like fiction. You should have the manuscript ready. This is, for example, when someone is writing a nonfiction book that is, like a lot of the political stuff that's coming out now. Those books were all proposals first. They talk to their agent, and their agent sent out these proposals to editor. And same thing, if you're querying agents with nonfiction, you would send a proposal to the agent instead of the manuscript. And that generally is, again, the query, the business letter telling me what it's about. And then what they include is an overview of what the book is trying to do, an overview of the audience you're trying to reach, a table of contents, and a couple of sample chapters so that I have an idea of what's going on. And then part of that, what you include is what's left to do. What kind of research? How are you prepared to do that research if you need to? What's your platform? That's very important for nonfiction. So if somebody's sending me a cookbook, I would be like, okay, well, do you do cooking videos on YouTube? Do you have a restaurant? Are you a caterer? Like, what is telling you that
What is
you know,
your
you don't,
experience?
yeah, what
Right.
is your experience? And you might not be any of those things. You might be a fabulous home cook who's done a blog,
Yeah.
but that blog has followers. So that tells me, okay, one of the things that is also unusual is for a lot of nonfiction like that, agents will often reach out directly to people. They're always sort of looking at the web and looking at different things to see who they can approach to bring in to try to sell those books.
Correct. So anything that is creative nonfiction, fiction, poetry, picture books, romance, what else?
Paranormal mysteries, you name it.
Paranormal mystery, thriller, horror, all those things that fall under the fiction category actually require a query, right?
Yep.
And then if the literary agent is interested, they would request the completed manuscript.
Yes.
If you're writing nonfiction, like you mentioned, like all these politicians are all writing books, that's
things
nonfiction.
that require, things that require research of some sort, or interviews, or things that are prescriptive, like a lot of the self-help books.
Those you submit a proposal.
Yes. Because
where you're trying to convince the literary agent, hey, I have this great idea. I think it would be really dope if I write about this, what do you think?
Somebody comes to me and says, I have this book about traveling in Dominica and what you need to know when you're traveling in the Dominican Republic versus Haiti.
Right.
Okay, great. That's wonderful. The reason they're treated differently is because a lot of times it takes more money to write those books. If you're writing fiction, you can do that in your free time, whatever free time you have.
Right.
If you're writing, say, this travel book, well, you need to have gone there recently.
You need to be traveling.
Yes, you need to be traveling. You need to be able to do research. You might need to interview people. You might need to pay those people for their interviews. You'll need pictures. Well, okay, either you're taking them themselves or you might need to pay someone to take those pictures. So that's why editors buy those on the proposal, because they're like, yeah, that's a great idea. I think that sounds fabulous that you did this restaurant tour through the DR, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pay you so you have that money up front to spend on doing all that to create the book.
Right. And you're not one of those people because you only do picture books to YA.
Right now, that is what I represent. I do also represent for adults. I am looking always for upmarket mysteries, which means things that are more literary, as opposed to a cozy. And the difference in that is cozies are like,
everybody's going to be querying you after this.
Oh yeah, and that's good because
and Leslie
that's how I find people.
Poetry, folks.
Yeah, I'm not a fit for that. I do like it. I actually like novels in verse. If you have a novel told in verse, whether for adults or for kids, that's great.
And novels in verse are novels like Elizabeth Acevedo that has written Clap When You Land and The Poet X in verse.
Yes.
And there's a few other writers.
Well, there's a woman, Padre Ventracamaran, who did it for middle grade. She writes them, things like that, because I like things to have a story. I do like poetry, but it's not something I feel confident representing. It's not something I would be good at, let's put it that way. And you need me to be good at what I do, so I'm doing the right thing for you. I do also represent upmarket romances for adults. And I will look at literary fiction for adults and nonfiction. So if someone's writing, then it sort of gets murkier, because while I will look at memoirs, it needs to be something outstanding. I see a lot of queries for them. So it needs to be something that I feel is very different or unique or speaks to me.
I've seen 20-year-olds writing memoirs.
I'd like to know what
you better sell the hell out of that book to me.
Well, but you know what? You might have a 20-year-old who has processed an experience, and they don't.
Right. Well,
I personally am not so much a fit for
must
Yeah.
have been, you know, exceptional for you to
Yeah.
have a memoir at 20 already.
Yeah. Something had to happen. So for instance, what would a memoir I'd be looking at? I'd be looking for a memoir maybe of someone who won the National Spelling Bee and what spelling is done in their life and how that's helped them succeed further on. I was a spelling bee nerd. So to me, that would speak to me. I'd be like, okay, you're 20, you won the spelling bee, you're in college, what's going on? I see there's a question here. I don't recommend starting a search for the agent before you have the full manuscript. That's the business part. Get that manuscript. Make it the best. Because I also get all these queries. I wrote this book. It's great. I wrote it last month. Yeah. Nobody
Or
else
what
has
if
seen this
they
book.
finished it last month? You
Exactly.
don't know how long they've been working on it.
Well, some people will say, I'm like, people who work on things a long time will say, I've been working on this for so long. You want to be specific, but usually you don't want to tell me any of that. What you want to tell me is, I have this book. It's a novel of Jews or, Jewish people who are resettled in the DR when they were chased out of Germany. And this is, this is what happens during this book. And I'm going to go read it. And I'm going to tell very quickly if that's a book you've been working on for a long time and you've developed your craft, or if that's a book you just said, yeah, I can rip this out.
Or you just winged it.
Yeah. And
Well,
it's not that
yeah.
that person won't become a good writer. They're just
Right.
not ready for an agent yet. They're going to become a good writer. They just need to keep working.
So Amanda, what if you're lucky enough to have that agent say, hey, I loved your query letters. Send me your manuscript by the end of the week, and you're not done?
Well, so first of all, most people don't say send it to me by a certain time. They just say send it to me. I have plenty of people who contacted
But you want to,
me.
if
Oh no, I
anyone
want to
says that
see
to
it.
me,
Yeah.
you want to send it immediately, right? You don't want to wait a week or 2 or a month.
Well, I would say that depends. Ideally, yes. But I've had people contact me and say, I just got feedback from a critique, or I got feedback from a conference, and I'm working on this. And I tell them, that's fine. Send it when you're ready. There's no expiration date on my request. I wanted to see it. I'm going to want to see it. Sometimes a lot of people will actually contact me and say, I'm getting this ready and I'll have it for you in a few weeks. That's fine.
Searching for a literary agent is also a full-time job.
Oh God, it's a lot of work. Because
so you don't want to be writing while you're looking for a literary agent.
You want your mind, either your mind is in your writing space or it's in your business space. And when it's in your business space, then you're like, I'm researching agents, I have my list, I'm querying, I'm getting this going. Maybe you're thinking about a new book, or you're thinking about things you want to write. Maybe you're experimenting with, you've been writing novels and now you're experimenting with poetry to kind of keep your hand in while you're querying on that novel. But you don't necessarily want to be like, I am writing this book and I'm halfway through and it's going to be great. Because you know what? You're going to query us and we're going to say that's great. But what if you're like me and you're slow? Or worse, you're like me and you get halfway through and you're like, oh, crap.
Mm-hmm.
This character is making me do things that I did not plan for. And now I have to come up with, a whole new story.
Right.
I am seeing this question that says, how can I find a good literary agent for me? Not to toot my own horn, but if you Google Leslie Zampetti in quotes and researching agents in quotes, there will be a Writer's Digest online article that pops up, and that should sort of get you started with the process and how to start going about that research.
Okay. Some of these people miss these questions because you answer them.
Well, that happens when we're live, right? It's like, whoops. And also, it's kind of dinner time, right? People are busy.
No, it's not. It's 8 o'clock, Leslie.
I'm going to be very embarrassed to tell you I ate before I came because I did not want to have my stomach growling on the live.
Before I got on here too, okay?
Well, and you know what we're all waiting for because, we're in the middle. We actually got to have baseball and like there's the Rays. The Rays are playing and I'm like, yay.
So
and
the best way of contacting a literary agent is through a query letter.
Oh, yes. And this is the hard part for writers. Every literary agent does it differently. Some do it directly through email. Some do it through query manager. Some have forms on their website. Please read their website, read their directions, see what they're asking for. Because it's not that what you're doing isn't special, but they're asking for that for a reason. So for instance, I don't want attachments because I don't want to get viruses, and I don't think my system can handle all that. And it also takes time to have to open every one and go look at it. I want to see those sample pages right in the body of the email. Some people, they don't deal with email. They have that form and they want the pages in the form, or they, it's like, I request a full. Some people request 50 pages. Some people request no pages,
Right.
Paying attention to that tells us that you are responsive, and that you'll also be good at working with an editor if an editor asks you to do certain things. But not that the editor makes all the choices, because I want to be clear. This is your story, you're writing it. And one of the reasons why I really harp on finding the right agent is you want to find someone who gets your story. If I am on the call with you offering you representation and you're like, yay, and then I start talking about your book and you are like, this white lady is not getting me at all.
Right.
Wind the conversation down politely and say, no, thank you. It's okay.
Right.
You don't need an agent. You need the right agent for your book. Because if I don't understand it and get it, how can I sell it? And if your editor doesn't get it, then you need to talk to the agent who sold that book and say, this lady does not get me. And then they have to step in and try to negotiate what's really going on there.
Correct. Leslie, are you able to join us for another 15 minutes to finish answering the questions?
Sure.
Okay, so
I'm like chatty.
I'm going to end this live, and then we're gonna come back on. Okay, so just join me in the same manner that you did earlier. Okay. Just give me a few seconds while I save this one. Okay.
Okay.
For everyone who's here, just rejoin us. We'll be right back.
Great.